Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Mary Logue, author of the new book, DEADWOOD, a Deadwood Mystery. Mary is the author of 13 mystery novels, including 9 novels in the Claire Watkins series. Mary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So I understand that you have a poem that you would like to read to us at the beginning here.
Yes, I'm a stealth poet, I call myself. No matter why I'm asked to come and do something, I love to sneak some poetry into it. This is from my latest book, Heartwood, that came out last year. It's my 5th book of poetry, and this is a very short poem, very short, even though it's called Long Winter. I write to sing in a slight voice. The trees are still here under snow, and I know they have leaves inside their branches. That's it.
That's great. Well, thank you for doing that. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your new novel, DEADWOOD, a Deadwood Mystery, how would you describe the novel?
Well, it's a historical mystery. The main character is an young Irish girl who's an immigrant from Ireland. It's set in the 1880s, and she traverses a good chunk of the United States and ends up in Deadwood to rejoin her brother. And then things happen.
Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to write STREEL, a Deadwood Mystery?
Absolutely. Again, I've written a lot of books, not just mysteries. And one of the books I was fortunate enough to get a grant to write from the Minnesota Historical Society was a book on my grandmother, and it's called Halfway Home. My grandma was Grandma Kerwin was raised in a little teeny town called Chicago, Minnesota. And she was the postmistress of that tiny town. And she raised 5 children on her own when her husband died. I knew her, but not very well. And she was of Irish descent and on both sides. And when I did research, I found out a lot about my Irish ancestry. I actually was able to find on the manifest my ancestors coming over from Ireland, which just made it seem so much more real. And I just realized 2 things writing the book on my grandmother. I realized 3 things. One was that I adored doing research. The other was that I felt like the Irish immigration, not that it's been neglected, but that there could be more to say about it. And was just kind of fascinated by what it must have been like for them to come to America at that time. And the third thing was, interestingly, that I realized how Irish I am, and that I actually have Gaelic Irish words in my vocabulary that I did not realize. One of those words being the STREEL.
That's interesting. Well, as you just mentioned, your mystery is set in the 1880s in Deadwood, South Dakota. What kind of research did you do while you were working on the novel?
Again, I loved doing the research for this. In fact, I often had to haul myself away from it and say, okay, it's time to start writing. But I did all sorts of different levels. I read diaries from the time period by women, especially, said that were living in Deadwood at that time. I did a lot of technical research, even on the mining that was going on. I went to Deadwood a number of times. And then I also read books that Bridget, my main character, would have read that were published at the time. And I also read Irish books that came out, during this time period, because I just wanted to have that Irish voice in my head when I was writing.
So what was your original writing journey that led you to writing and getting your first novel published?
I don't know how far back we want to go, but I was always just a super avid reader, and but I didn't, when I was young, even into my teens, I didn't really realize you could be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it seemed so far off, and I didn't know any writers. So it was just kind of off in the distance. And so when I went to the University of Minnesota and got a degree in French and English, and I thought I would be a translator. And in fact, I've translated many children's books from French into English, I just enjoy translation so much. But as I was doing that, I started to do some of my own writing, and I started out with poetry. I wrote a lot of journalism. I moved to New York from Minnesota and worked on the Village Voice and worked for Simon and Schuster. So I learned a lot about publishing too. And interestingly enough, my first novel, which was set in Minnesota and called Red Lake of the Heart, was written in New York City. And I think a lot of it had to do with kind of homesickness in a way. I loved New York, but I really missed Minnesota.
That's interesting. So what is it about mystery novels that appealed to you as a writer?
Well, I'll tell you, this is kind of a funny story. So I'm living in New York, and I finished a novel called Designing Women. And it was before the TV show came out called Designing Women. Right. And it was set on the West Bank in Minnesota, on the West Bank of the Mississippi, and involved waitresses and bass players, which I knew a lot about both of those subjects. And I sent it around to some publishers because I had some nice connections in New York. And I got back the same response, which was great characters, wonderful dialogue. There doesn't seem to be a plot. and I thought, well, maybe I should write a mystery because I have always loved them. My mom was an avid mystery reader, and I kind of fell in line there. And I thought, if that's what I'm not getting, if that's the problem with my writing at the moment, then let's go after it. And so I wrote my first mystery, and that was Red Lake of the Heart. And that was the first book I got published.
So what was your writing process when you were working on the STREEL? Did you outline the novel extensively or just dive into the narrative? And I'm curious, is your writing process the same from novel to novel?
That is an interesting question. I think it's basically the same, but different books require different things. I tend to be a linear writer. I know some people are what I would call patchwork, where they write scenes, you kind of put them together, but I just feel like the beginning of a book is so important. I usually think about a book for about a year before I start writing it, which doesn't mean I'm not writing at the same time. I might be finishing up the book before it, but I'm a planner, and so I'm often thinking ahead to, like, even with the STREEL. Now I've finished the second book in this. This is going to be a series. And I'm already thinking about the third book. And what happens is I just mull it over in my head. I do a lot of walking with my dogs, and I do a lot of thinking and thinking. I get phrases. I figure out the opening. I think I know the ending, but I don't write anything down. I just kind of let it. I always feel like I'm kind of panning for gold because when I just let things kind of simmer in my head, the dreck kind of seems to fall away. And what really stays with me is what I can use and what's important and what's the gold. And so then by the time I sit down to write it, I know quite a bit about it. I have tried to outline, but it doesn't seem to work for me very well because what happens is after I go about 4 chapters following my outline, things start to change. And so what I've learned is I tend to outline about 4 chapters at a time so that I have the flexibility to really feel where the book is going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. So are
Yeah.
you working on that third novel in the series now?
Yes, in my head.
In your head.
It's going to be set in Salt Lake City, so I just got a copy of the Book of the Mormon. And it's a really interesting time period because it's right when polygamy was coming under assault. And so I just think it's going to be fascinating to do the research that I get to do for this next book. So yeah, I'm really seeing it again, and I've written nothing down on paper at all, but I really see it as more of an Agatha Christie, 5 people. The husband has 5 wives, and somehow he goes and gets dad killed, and so we have to figure out who did it. I haven't written that kind of book before, and I'm really looking forward to it.
That sounds great. Well, given your journey as a writer, as you explained, including poetry and you working at the Village Voice and writing mystery novels, what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories or novels?
Well, a couple of things. One thing I'm always, I teach a class. I've taught at Hamline University and also at the U of University of Minnesota. And I taught a class called The Business of Being a Writer. And one of the things that I really have emphasized in the class is the beginning of a book. I'm also, now that I have gotten plot under my belt, I have a lot to say about plot, but also really think about your title. Those, as I often say, might be the only words a person will ever read of your book. And so make sure they're good and make sure they pull the reader into the book. Second, really pay attention to your first sentence. Really pay attention to your first paragraph. Really pay attention to your first page. Really pay attention to your first chapter, because everyone that reads it will read it in basically that order. And if you want to get an editor, if you want to, get an agent and have it published, you need to hook them right away. So, I'm really thoughtful about how I open, how I introduce the reader to the world that they're about to enter.
I'm curious about plot, because you talked about that
Mm-hmm.
earlier, and you had this novel that you sent around to publishers, and the feedback that you received was that it did not have a plot. What did you do to learn to plot?
Well, again, I really have kind of a stylized thing I think about now, which is the main thing that I realized more and more was your main character needs to want something. It can be to solve a mystery. It can be to get the cute guy to fall in love with them. It can be to save the world. Whatever they want, that's the driver in your book. And so the other thing that I'm really conscious of is whatever they want cannot be easy to get. So that's where we have suspense. That's where we have the pull that brings the reader through the book. Will they get what they want? I think it's kind of that basic. And sometimes it can seem almost too simple, but, and what they want can change somewhat. And sometimes they cannot get what they want even in a book. But that is the driving force that should be through your book.
So what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Well, I was thinking you might ask me that, and I'm really, I actually went to the library the other day to kind of stock up on books over the Christmas holiday, because if I don't have a good book to read, I feel really lost. So I'm really excited because I found out Minette Walters is one of my favorite writers. She's a British mystery writer, and she wrote The Sculptress and some other books that have done really well. She really knows plot inside and out. And I just found out that she wrote a series, or at least 2 books, set in early England around the Black Plague. And I thought, how weird and eerie and fortuitous to
Sure.
be that these books have come out during this weird time period we're in. And so I haven't cracked it yet, but I have enjoyed so much her work before. So I'm really, really, it's kind of a gift to myself for Christmas. So
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your novels?
well, I am kind of splattered all over. I did have a website for a while, and but it got taken over so that when you went to go to Mary Logue, what you found was how to order Viagra, and yeah, that just happened. So unfortunately, my website is no longer, but there is a lot of information. If they just Google Mary Logue, they'll get a lot of information about me, most of it true.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Mary Logue, author of the new novel, DEADWOOD, a Deadwood Mystery. The novel is available now, so go buy a copy from your local independent bookstore. And Mary, thanks for doing this interview.
Well, I appreciate it so much, Jeff, and happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you.
Done.
You're busy prepping for Easter. Let Meijer make it easier. From shopping for goodies, planning dinner, inviting family over, seeing if your husband can still fit into that embarrassing bunny suit. Meijer can help with low prices on items like ham, gorgeous lilies, candy, baskets, and holiday clothes for the kids. Find everything you need in-store, online, or in the Meijer app. Meijer makes Easter easier on you. Your husband's bunny suit? Well, he's on his own. Exclusions apply. See all the deals in the Meijer app.